So, welcome everybody. I'd like to say thank you very much to Louise Smith and to Emma Birkett from Kent County Council, who are going to talk to us about riparian responsibilities in relation to flooding. So I'll hand straight over to Emma. Take it away. What we're going to do with questions is, can you put them in the chat? We have already had some sent over in advance, but if you put them in the chat as we go along, we'll try and deal with as many as we can at the end. Okay, thanks, Emma.
Okay, it's actually over to Louise. I'm just going to share the presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emma. Good afternoon or early evening, everybody. It's really nice of everybody to join. We are from Kent County Council's lead local flood authority. I'm the flood and water manager for the team, and Emma is our land drainage engineer. We've been asked to present regarding riparian responsibility. We're obviously presenting this from a Kent County Council perspective. We've tried to encompass as much of the sort of broader information as we could, but you'll have to apologise if it does seem a bit Kent focused in a couple of places. And hopefully we can answer questions about the more broader sort of subject matter, but we may need to sort of suggest that you speak to your lead local flood authority for more specific answers if you've got a particular sort of topic that you need covered, or a question that's relevant for your local area. Emma, if you could pass on to the next slide. Thank you. So we were going to give an introduction to lead local flood authorities, why were they created, and their role. So if we go to the next slide. Brilliant. So the PIT review was undertaken in 2008, and it was initiated in response to flooding that occurred in 2007 across the country that was extremely significant, and it included the loss of life. And what the review assessed was how flood risk management was undertaken by the risk management authorities across the country, and essentially how well that was done. But it found some major weaknesses, and it proposed 92 improvements as part of that review. And key recommendations focused on improving flood resilience, better agency coordination, and enhanced emergency planning to protect communities. And as part of this, it also created lead local flood authority. So it took some of the responsibility from the Environment Agency and it gave that to local authorities under the LLFA role. And it was established to help manage the local flood risk with a statutory responsibility, and it improved local accountability. And I think that's quite key. We work very closely with our districts and boroughs. We work closely with our Environment Agency colleagues, our highways colleagues, our internal drainage boards, and specifically local communities as well, in helping to manage and address surface water flood risk, groundwater flood risk, and also we have a role as a statutory consultee for planning. By having that separation, Environment Agency obviously take responsibility for main rivers. We have more responsibility for ordinary watercourses, those that fall outside of the Environment Agency and the Internal Drainage Board's remit. And also surface water, we're able to focus our attention on those areas and then help to address some of those problems. Lead local flood authorities have a responsibility for developing flood risk strategies. We have a local flood risk strategy in Kent that covers a 10-year period. It was published last year. It will take us through to 2034. Within that, we have a 5-year review period, and we have a number of targets and metrics for assessing essentially how well we're doing in delivering our role. We also have responsibility for maintaining asset registers of the assets that are developed within our ordinary watercourses, and to help manage surface water flood risk. We investigate floods through the Section 19 flood investigations, and we coordinate with other agencies for effective flood management. In Kent, we have the Kent Resilience Team, which help to bring everybody together, and that's a really sort of broad church of organisations, from unitary authority and county council members to the district and boroughs, the fire and rescue service, and things like the Kent local councils, so the parish councils that also sit on and get involved in that. So we've got an awful lot of layers to that kind of effective flood management and coordination. And by talking to everybody, we're able to get a better appreciation of some of the risks, and also some of the actions that need to be taken. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Emma. So Section 19 flood investigations are quite key to some of the work that we undertake. The policy within Kent is that a report is triggered when 5 or more residential properties are flooded internally, or significant infrastructure is impacted by a flood event. And there is some guidance on the government website about Section 19's. Different lead local flood authorities may have different triggers for undertaking one, depending on sort of the geography of their county, and sort of the pressures that may be faced from flood risk. But the flood investigation report looks at the significant flood events and outlines which authorities were involved. It looks at the description of the flooding and the mechanisms for the flooding, and it may go on to recommend actions that can be taken to address that flood risk in the future. But they're not designed to attribute blame, and they're not there to actually set out what needs to be done to do it, to address flood risk in the future. So we're not actually looking for it to be sort of a report. What we do in Kent is we take these flood investigations and we do actually use them to then look at further flood risk assessment and the options that might be available to manage surface water flood risk and address flooding within local communities. But the limitations are that we lack enforcement powers, and we often face challenges like high public expectations and multi-agency data collection. So that can be one of the problems, is that we find that we've got gaps when we're undertaking these investigations in some of the responses that have been undertaken by different agencies, and also that the impacted community may have expectations that the report will ultimately attribute blame, and they'll be able to perhaps find someone to take legal action against. But it's not always that easy to be able to say that flooding has one single cause, and that there is one single agency or person responsible for it. But they do help to provide public awareness, and they also help us as an organisation to understand where we are seeing regular flood events, and then sort of take a more strategic approach to be able to manage that flood risk. So just recently in Kent, we've created a heat map using our Section 19 information, our regularly reported flood events, and information from other organisations and agencies such as Highways, to actually understand where our most significant issues are being faced within the county. Emma, if you could move on to the next slide. We also have a statutory consultee role in planning. So since 2015, we've reviewed drainage strategies for major developments to help manage flood risk effectively. And sustainable drainage, and certainly the new national planning policy framework, has given certainly increased strength to SUDs and the role that they play within major development in helping to manage surface water across the development, and ultimately a role to play in helping to reduce flood risk in the more wider area. So where there may have previously been no drainage within a field and you have no control over that runoff, actually having a development on there means that you do suddenly have drainage, and you may be able to have a more effective role in controlling the runoff that comes off the field. Obviously, planning does come with many other challenges, and there are plenty of other issues associated with new developments. But we do see that SUDs have the opportunity to play a role in controlling flood risk to some degree. And SUDs certainly also have an opportunity to provide some biodiversity benefit and amenity value within those developments. So I would say it's a balanced approach. But we would also say it's important for developers to engage with us early to make sure that their sustainable drainage is the best that it possibly can be, and also to talk about some of those strategic risks that we may be aware of and they're not so aware of. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Emma. So as I've said, we have a local flood risk management strategy. This is a 10-year strategy for us. We've extended it beyond what we were previously doing, but it does set out a number of targets around how we are going to comprehensively manage flood risk across the county. How we coordinate with other agencies and our partners in being able to do that, how we're going to develop significant community engagement and resilience, because it is very important that we have that community engagement and that we look at ways of communities being able to help support themselves in managing some of the risk, and also how we're going to address some of the challenges that we face from climate adaptation and change, because ultimately we are seeing more frequent intensive rainfall, especially within Kent, that's leading to a lot more summer flooding, and it's that intensive storms that lead to the flashy surface water flooding that we typically see that causes our biggest problems. Thank you, Emma. So risk management authorities in Kent, I've touched on this. We obviously got the Environment Agency. I think that's probably familiar to most of you. They have a role for managing main river and coastal erosion. And they also have a responsibility for reservoirs, estuaries and the sea, lucky them. And internal drainage boards may be familiar to some of you. Other areas within the country may not have them. I believe there's around 127 internal drainage boards across England. They have designated districts and have a responsibility for water level management within those areas. So they may have watercourses that would otherwise be considered main river, right down to very small ordinary watercourses and drainage ditches. They have consenting over land drainage. And they have quite a lot of enforcement duties. Most of them have an operational element as well, so they will undertake things like dredging of ditches and ensuring those watercourses are clear. They're independent bodies operated by boards, which are elected from district and borough councils and landowners, and we have a very close working relationship with ours in Kent, and I would say they're a very effective way of being able to manage flood risk across the county. There's also the sewage undertakers, so all of our water companies, so they're responsible obviously for foul and combined drainage infrastructure. I'm sure everybody is aware of some of the challenges we currently face with our water companies around combined sewer overflows. Within Kent, we're working very closely with Southern Water at the moment to look at how we can address that. And the opportunities by working together to manage some of those combined sewer overflows that can be delivered through sustainable drainage and actually help to address some of the surface water flooding within the county. Our highways bodies are responsible for flooding on the highway, obviously, and they manage that water. And then Highways England are responsible for flooding on the major motorways and trunk roads across the country. Thanks, Emma. And I will now hand over to Emma, who will take you through the more detailed riparian ownership and watercourse management within Kent. And I think that's ultimately why everybody came this afternoon to listen to Emma's presentation. So I'll hand over to Emma. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to talk about riparian ownership and the legal framework that that goes with that. Some of this, again, is more focused on Kent, as it is quite nuanced, and different lead local flood authorities may approach things slightly different based on the legislation, resources, budgets, etc. So what is a riparian owner? It's an individual whose land either joins or includes a watercourse. So a watercourse can have a wide range of features, including natural rivers or streams, as well as man-made or seasonal channels such as ditches, culverts and underground pipes. Springs and ephemeral streams like winterbournes are also classed as watercourses, although people often think they're not because they're not flowing all the time. So it's important to understand the distinction between a main river and an ordinary watercourse. Main rivers are typically designated and regulated by the Environment Agency, so they will undertake dredging, vegetation clearance. If they flood, they will generally sort of look into that and create their own reports for that. And ordinary watercourses will fall under the jurisdiction of either the lead local flood authority or where you have them internal drainage boards. So not all places within the UK have IDBs or internal drainage boards, and the difference is important because the areas determine which authority is responsible for the oversight and enforcement of the maintenance and enforcement obligations. Riparian ownership in itself carries specific responsibilities, including the need to ensure that the watercourse flows freely and prevention of flooding or environmental degradation. It's important to note that when free flow is mentioned, it's only normal flow. So enforcement action can't be taken for extreme weather events. It only accounts for where normal flow is blocked, and there's no legal definition of normal flow. So it's based on knowing the area, which brings us back to, again, why these powers were given to local authorities rather keeping them centralised, because if you're not from the area, you might not know what normal local conditions may be. So Kent County Council plays a large role in managing watercourses in Kent. We provide guidance and enforcement action where we can, or where it meets our intervention levels. However, Kent County Council and many other local councils don't maintain ordinary watercourses, nor do they own them. This is often a misconception that if there's a ditch next to the road that it belongs to the local council, and I'll speak about that a bit more later on. But we will carry out inspections, we will offer advice, we will work with people to try and resolve issues, and the last resort is always, you know, there is the possibility of enforcement, but we try not to head straight to that route. Many lead local flood authorities won't have a lot of resource, and so this is why intervention levels may vary across the country. For example, in Kent, it's just myself, and I have another member of staff that helps me with consents, but it's not a huge team. And then the other side of the team is our planning guys. So just bear in mind sometimes that our departments are quite small. So the legal framework governing riparian ownership and watercourse management comes from the Land Drainage Act 1991, and this outlines the duties of riparian owners, and it grants enforcement powers to authorities such as Kent County Council, as LLFA, the Environment Agency, and the internal drainage districts. The Flood and Water Management Act built on this by providing updated definitions of the responsibilities, particularly concerning culverts and drainage infrastructure. Alongside this, Kent County Council has developed its own land drainage policy, which defines riparian rights and responsibilities without the legal context, so it's in plainer English. Explains enforcement mechanisms, details consent process for works affecting watercourses. We also offer guidance on ordinary watercourse and land drainage consent offers, both to developers and private landowners, to, you know, encourage that engagement at an early stage, especially with the larger developments. So this helps frame this helps build a framework to ensure that we can manage our watercourses effectively in Kent and mitigate any environmental or legal problems that may arise. So under the Land Drainage Act, we do get powers of enforcement. However, there is no duty to act. It is only a permissive power, which is why many councils will have different intervention levels at which they will seek formal enforcement. So these powers allow the relevant authority to maintain the free flow of water, enforce those riparian responsibilities, grant or refuse land drainage consents for works that may affect a channel, and the relevant agencies can also take action to remove blockages or unauthorised structures under Section 20. However, again, these powers are permissive and not mandatory, which means that no LLFA, IDB or EA is obligated to act unless it's felt to be proportionate and cost effective. So it has to be in the best interest of the public in order to pursue enforcement action. And this creates lots of challenges, especially because many landowners are often unaware of their responsibilities when they buy a property. They're not told that, that channel at the end of your garden or the channel that is just on the other side of your fence of the field that you've bought is actually yours to maintain. And so they get neglected. Additionally, resource constraints can limit the lead local flood authority's ability to conduct site visits and enforce compliance. Changing weather patterns and urbanisation further strain our drainage systems, making proactive regulation more critical but more difficult. So we must try to navigate these complex ownership issues, particularly where multiple ownership is involved, and that's quite a common issue where you'll have multiple owners on sections of a stream and sometimes multiple owners on both banks as well. So someone may not own both banks, it may only be to the centre line. So common misconceptions around riparian duties. Riparian owners are responsible for the maintenance of the banks and the beds of the watercourse, including any piped or culverted sections running through their land. And sometimes people will have culverted sections of watercourse running under their gardens or through their fields, and because they're not mapped, they may not be aware of them. So this can cause problems where pipes are ripped up during ploughing, for example. New farmer in a field, and then will be, they may ring the lead local flood authority to say, whose pipe is this? And then obviously we have to say, oh, very sorry, it's yours. So the responsibility for watercourses and culverted sections are that responsibility of the landowner. So they must ensure that the flow is unobstructed, they must remove debris, and they need to verify the safety and structures of any items within their curtilage, such as head walls, culverts, penstocks, weirs, culverts, open channels. Ownership will typically extend to the centre of the watercourse where different owners are on either side, and the council does have enforcement powers under Section 21 and 25 of the Land Drainage Act, which we can choose to use to compel maintenance where we feel it's in the public interest to do so. These responsibilities are critical for preventing flooding, protecting property and preserving environmental quality. Our policy at KCC places emphasis on proactive maintenance, and we try to encourage landowners to understand and fulfil their duties to avoid enforcement action, potential liability, but also friction with neighbours can often occur as a result of unmaintained channels. So on this slide here, we have a mock-up that I've done of what could be a land registry entry. So we've got landowner 1 here, another landowner here, and landowner C. The bold black line shows the boundary of landowner A and B's land. So this would mean that landowner A and landowner B own up to the centre line of that channel. And this watercourse is the boundary between the properties. As the watercourse moves naturally, the boundary to those land parcels will also move. So sometimes you will get an issue where, say, for example, there's a flood and this channel is connected, say here, effectively this landowner in landowner A parcel has gained an amount of land and landowner B may not be very happy about it. In these instances, there's very little a lead local flood authority can do, and if there was still friction between the landowners, we would advise they seek legal advice and pursue that civilly. Landowner C here, you can see the watercourse is fully contained within their land parcel, and so they would be the owner for the full extent of the channel as it passes through their land. Okay, another misconception is that roadside ditches are the responsibility of either the local council or the lead local flood authority or the highways authority. Generally, this isn't the case. The only time that ditches on the road edge are owned by the highway authority for the area is if they've been purposely put in only to drain the land, only to drain the road, but they don't serve the land. So the picture here that I've put is a location in Kent, and this is a roadside ditch, but because it's bunded up on the roadside, it's still the adjacent landowners' channel, and the highways may connect into it, but they don't have to clear it. And this can be some contention. Obviously, we do try to work with people. If excessive silt is coming off the road, the highways agency may choose to clear that in order to prevent flooding if it's occurring. Another misconception is where a hedge or a fence has been installed on the home side of the ditch, which was common, that they think anything on the other side of that hedge or fence is not part of their property, and often on the land registry it won't be shown as part of their property. Unfortunately, the hedge and ditch rule, which is detailed in part 11 of the land registry guidance notes, does state that when ditches were dug back in the day originally, you would dig the ditch, bund home side and plant a hedge or a fence in order to knit the bank together and protect your property. The other one, which I touched on earlier, is seasonal watercourses aren't watercourses because they don't flow all year. If it is a defined channel and it only flows for 1 week a year, still a watercourse. So these are easy to get forgotten about, may not flow for 5 years, it becomes silted, and then it starts to flow. And obviously that landowner may get a letter that says, please, can you clear this out? And they are under the impression that it wasn't a watercourse because it flows for a week every 5 years. But the legislation states where there is a channel that water flows through, it is considered a watercourse. Okay, watercourse type. So it's just a few additional principles which we've touched on. So the ad medium film principle. So this is a Latin phrase, and it refers to the presumption that ownership will extend to the middle of a stream or watercourse or road, unless the property deeds specify otherwise. So where roads are adopted, the ownership of the land parcel still extends to the centre line of the road. The local authority will own the road construction, but not the land beneath it. And if you look on a land registry map, it will show the roads are all unregistered. And so this is where the ad medium film principle comes from, that those responsibilities do actually extend to the centre of the road because the underlying subsurface soil is not owned by the council. So it's only the road construction. Hedge and ditch maintenance rules, which I've just gone through. So those rules just clarify that hedges were normally planted homeside to protect the responsibility, and the ditch does form part of that land parcel. Highways generally do not have riparian duties, as the subsoil isn't owned. As I've just said, that leads us back into ad medium film. But they will manage and drain surface water off of the highway. So they do quite often discharge into channels on the side of the road. And as I mentioned earlier, this can be a contentious point, as it may get silted from road use and become very expensive to maintain. In Kent, we try and work with landowners to resolve these issues, but that can be sometimes tricky, you know, with that cost burden on the riparian owner. Springs, groundwater and winterbourne, excuse me. Seasonal water courses are important to keep clear, as we've mentioned before, even if they don't run all the time, because they do offer huge relief when big floods come. Those channels fill, they offer storage, and they keep the water where it's meant to be rather than where it's a danger to people. So again, it is important to keep channels flow clear even where there isn't a lot of flow. So the key responsibility under the Land Drainage Act is that you must maintain the free flow of water and must not obstruct watercourses or divert them without consent. Should somebody block or divert, this can cause environmental damage. If you dry up one channel and flood a field, for example, because you no longer want the water going in there, or someone no longer wants the water in a channel, that can have a big effect on ecology. And so that is something that may well trigger enforcement action if discussions to restore it to its previous condition are not, they don't go very well. And obviously proper management of seasonal watercourses is essential for when those floods come, to ensure the safety of everybody in the local area, making sure that they're going to capture the water that they need to store. So infrastructure and maintenance. So culverts and pipes are often used to reroute watercourses beneath roads or on developments. However, culverting should only be employed where it's absolutely necessary. Open watercourses are always preferred. This is because they offer far more environmental benefits. They're far easier to maintain, as you can see clearly when they're blocked or when there's a problem, and they offer greater resilience to flooding. When culverting's unavoidable, there are several factors that you need to consider, including hydraulic capacity, the risk of blockage, environmental impact, and potential mitigation measures. In Kent, the installation of culverts can only be granted where there's a requirement for access. Installation of culverts in any watercourse requires formal consent under the Land Drainage Act, and failure to obtain this consent can result in enforcement actions where the person installing the culvert or outfall would be asked to remove it and restore it back to open ditch. Proper design and maintenance of any culvert is essential, because we don't want to exacerbate flood risks or degrade the environment in the local area. So under our policy, as I mentioned a moment ago, we only consent culverts where access to a site is required, or where we receive a consultation stating that there would be a danger to public safety if this culvert isn't installed. For example, there's not enough room to put in a public footpath and one is required for a development. So we would then consider that, but we would request all the evidence to be provided to show that every other alternative option has been considered, such as realignment of the watercourse, taking it somewhere else on site to another low spot, perhaps moving it into the site slightly so it can sit behind a footway. And unless this can be shown to us, we would still deny that, saying we need to see evidence that this really is our only option. So any culvert installed must span the existing width of the channel. We must not cause a restriction to flow, because in high flow, it would be very easy for a pipe that's undersized to get blocked. And if you remember me mentioning earlier that the enforcement language in the legislation only accounts for normal flow. So we tend to advise to go with the width of the channel, and average channels you would take the width about 2/3 of the way up the ditch to where it's starting to store water, so you're not losing that storage capacity. On larger channels, there would need to do calculations, and we would need to see the hydraulics to ensure that we are not losing flow capacity by culverting it. One of the biggest reasons we get for wanting to downsize culverts is road access over the top. We always argue back that you can install an elliptical culvert, or you can install a box culvert that will give you the same cross section but reduce your heights to enable you to get that road construction in. So there is always an option. The culverts don't always have to be round, although commonly they are. We would also ask for a maintenance schedule as part of that process, because without proper design and maintenance, these culverts will fail fairly quickly, and obviously as a result they would cause problems locally with flooding to property or infrastructure. So best practice maintenance. We are currently working on a best practice maintenance guide, which hopefully will be published later in the year, that we've been working on. And this is one of the biggest questions that we often get: how do I look after my small stream or channel in my land? And so we always recommend regular inspections, including channels, banks, and any structures that are there, so culverts, head walls, weirs, etc., to check for blockages caused by rubbish or vegetation, and that should be removed carefully to avoid damaging habitats. It's not often we would say go in with a digger and scrape it back to bare earth, because you're removing, all of that good stuff that the nature likes and the animals like. So we call it sympathetic maintenance, and if you do this regularly, you don't get to the stage where you're needing a digger to dig it out. You can do it with a rake and a rubbish bag. For most channels within Kent, they tend to be very small. Vegetation on the bank needs to be managed to prevent overgrowth and from the root systems for undermining bank stability. In the same breath, you don't want to clear all of the vegetation, because the roots of the vegetation do help knit that bank together. But when you get saplings starting to grow in channel or inside the bank, those sorts of things should be removed as soon as possible, as they will eventually, the root system will block the channel. Spoil that is taken out should be deposited responsibly, making sure it doesn't obstruct the channel or have a opportunity to fall back in the channel should there be high flow shortly afterwards. The EA's guidance is that the spoil, if you're using a machine, should be put digger arm's length from the bank. So as you spin the machine, you would put it 1 arm's length away from the bank, and it should sit there for at least a few days to allow any critters that you've pulled out the watercourse to run back in. Following that, if you need to remove it off-site, it is classed as contaminated waste and should be disposed of as contaminated waste. Alternatively, it can be used to restore the bunds on the bank, so the humps on the edge of the channel that stop the water from overtopping or from coming in from a direction that you don't want to. But anything extra that you don't want on site should be disposed of as contaminated waste. We also recommend, where people have larger channels, and where they do cause issues locally, because it can get quite tense, that they actually just keep a little booklet and just write down in there when they've inspected it, what the condition of the channel was and any action taken. So you could do that on a computer with, you know, photos in a Word document or just a little notebook, and that just protects you as a landowner from somebody saying, you never maintain this watercourse, I've never seen you do any work. And if you can produce your little record saying, you know, it gets checked 3 times a year, we carry out maintenance once a year, here are the before and after pictures, I can prove that I do manage it, that is a protection for you as a riparian owner. So a little bit more on consent and enforcement. So consent is required for any work in, over, under or near ordinary watercourses, including both permanent structures like a new bridge, a culvert, a head wall, an outfall, for example, and temporary works that are undertaken to facilitate construction. Quite often you'll want to dewater a section to provide a dry working space, and that act of dewatering and overpumping, which is the most common method, also requires consent, as we want to ensure that it is being pumped appropriately to the appropriate place and at the appropriate rate. Works that alter the alignment of the watercourse or divert flow is also required to have consent, as do any additions that could restrict the flow of water. It's important to note that although a site may have planning permission for an outfall or for a structure, it doesn't mean that they've automatically got land drainage consent. The two are two completely separate pieces of legislation, and they both need to be applied for. So just because the planning says, yes, that's okay, it doesn't mean necessarily that we may agree that it's suitable for the watercourse, and it may not be granted land drainage consent without adjustment. So that's partly why we offer advice services for developers as well, to ensure that we can pick all of that up right in early on in the scheme. We can ensure that we don't get to the position where they've been given planning consent, but we won't grant the consent to carry out the works on the watercourse. Additionally, works within buffer zones near main rivers, coastal defences or internal drainage board districts may require consent. Lead local flood authorities only have control over the trapezoidal, the inner section, the channel of the watercourse, whereas the Environment Agency and the IDBs both have powers over the banks that extend to 8 to 10 metres. So if you're within 8 to 10 metres of an internal drainage board channel or a main river, that would also trigger the requirement for consent. So it's important to make sure that if you're planning any works, you know, to check with the lead local flood authority and just see, you know, do you need consent and who do I need to get it from? Okay, enforcement. This section I have mostly stuck to KCC's policy because I'm not quite sure how other lead local flood authorities manage enforcement, what their criteria are for enforcement. So this is more focused on what we would do with some of the legislation, which will be the same across the board. So all lead local flood authorities have permissive enforcement powers under the Land Drainage Act to address non-compliance issues with riparian owners. If a riparian owner fails to maintain a watercourse and it results in causing flooding or nuisance, the council can take, or the local authority can take action under sections 21 and 25 to compel maintenance. Section 23 of the Land Drainage Act grants the authority to consent works, while section 24 allows for the removal of unconsented works. Should someone carry out works and then refuse to remove it, we have powers to go in and remove it for them and recharge for that. KCC generally prefers an advisory approach. So we will work with landowners to help resolve issues amicably where possible. We do not, however, get involved in neighbourly disputes, simply because we're not here to take sides. We would offer the same advice to both parties and limit it to riparian ownership, and then it would be considered a civil dispute. But generally, in most cases, we're able to work with both parties to resolve the issue and work to a solution. Where necessary, we may be forced in the interest of public safety and environmental integrity, we may be forced to pursue enforcement action. So understanding the powers and the circumstances under which we would begin formal enforcement is important, and the same with any other lead local flood authority. It's important to know where their threshold lies for that formal enforcement, and where they would choose not to undertake enforcement action. And again, this links back to, you know, the resource within the team. A lot of LLFAs are running with very small teams and minimal funding. Formal enforcement action costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is why it is generally only where public safety or infrastructure is under, you know, threat, or you know, there's a real safety issue if this isn't pursued. So as Louise mentioned right at the start, we work with many different stakeholders. We find that effective management involves multiple stakeholders, each with distinct roles and responsibilities. So the landowners or the riparian owners need to understand that where their property boundaries are, where their watercourses are, and how they plan to inspect and maintain those watercourses. They also may need to determine, do they need consent if they're proposing any works, for example, creating an access to put culverts in, to drive a car or farm vehicle over it would require consent. So this is why I said earlier, if you're unsure, if you have a watercourse and you're unsure if your activities require consent, make sure that you check with them. The Environment Agency is responsible for Main River, issuing environmental permits, monitoring water quality, and they develop broader flooding strategies. Internal drainage boards can also play a supervisory and maintenance role, particularly in those areas with complex drainage networks and where water level management is critical. So the internal drainage boards have bylaws that give them some more powers over what the lead local flood authority would have, because without effective management within a district, an internal drainage district, you know, these flooding issues would be more compounded. And we do a lot of work with our local internal drainage boards in Kent. We have 5 of them, so there's quite a few here. So collaboration between all the stakeholders is essential, especially where we get water crossing multiple properties, ownerships, or even districts of authority. So you may have a watercourse that starts as a main river channel. Downstream, it's ordinary watercourse under the lead local flood authority, and then a little bit further downstream, it then flows into an internal drainage board area. So any works on those kinds of stretches requires communication between all 3 parties, the IDB, the EA, and the LLFA, to ensure that we're all looking at the watercourse in the same way, that what this person's doing up here upstream in the EA area is not going to have a detrimental effect on, say, further downstream where it enters the internal drainage board. Failure to comply with the responsibility can lead to a range of negative consequences, you know, not just enforcement, but things like increased risk of flooding, which can affect not only the landowner, but neighbouring properties. And, you know, relationships built with neighbours over years can be destroyed overnight by something that was perhaps a minor ask of or you haven't cleared that channel for a couple of years and we've got heavy rain coming, you know, and the riparian owner shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, it hasn't flooded in 10 years. You know, if you then get a huge flood, you may lose your relationship with your local neighbours or community. Property can be severely damaged by flooding, infrastructure severely degraded, which can cost local authorities a lot of money to restore, and also land erosion are common outcomes of neglected watercourse and channels. Legal liabilities can arise, resulting in the cost of remedial works or the need to defend against claims, either an enforcement action from a local council or a private civil claim from somebody's property that was damaged from the lack of action by the riparian owner. The individual is also able to take that landowner to court as well as enforcement action. They're not mutually exclusive. So even if a lead local flood authority decided to pursue formal enforcement, if neighbouring property was damaged due to the floods, they could also take that landowner to court to recoup the cost of repairing their property, for example. So the other side of it is it can cause huge environmental damage. We can lose habitat, that can cause water pollution and also breach environmental laws. So compounded on top of the other two issues, you may then also have the EA coming to you as that riparian owner saying you've caused a pollution incident, which then is another court case and another problem for the sake of, you know, an hour on a Saturday morning, maybe raking out a channel of the leaves so that it flows through your land effectively. All these risks underscore the importance of fulfilling those riparian duties and maintaining watercourses proactive and seeking the appropriate consent. And the burden of this really is placed on the landowner. And by being a responsible landowner and learning where your duties lie, you can help protect your property, but you can also help contribute to community resilience, you know, and make lots of friends in the process, maybe. So I have a couple of case studies that I just wanted to share with you. The first one I'm going to talk you through. The second one Louise will talk you through, and this is just an example of multiple agencies coming together to resolve some problems. So the Orkham Valley in Kent is a village between Folkestone and Dover, and the Orkham Valley Road, where these flood photos were taken, is the main route between Folkestone and Dover for a lot of rural people. And in December 2012 and January 2013, I'm sure everybody remembers those floods, but this road became completely cut off. And the village, nobody from the village could get out. Emergency services couldn't get in. And this was photos that I took a few days after the flood when the road reopened again, and it remained like this for quite some time. This is a bourne, this stream, and so it doesn't flow very often. So whilst the area had previously had some flooding, it never quite seen anything like this. And because of the fact that no emergency services were able to access the village, obviously this triggered a need to do something to resolve this. So the picture on the left of the screen is how the watercourse was after the floods had subsided. And then this picture here is the work that we undertook on this section to provide clear span crossings so that there was no restriction to flow, and also increase the channel storage capacity during flood events. We worked with the local community for over 2 years during this project, where we met with the local residents of these properties and the people of the village, the parish, and our highways team, Kent Highways, who also joined our meeting. So this collaborative approach ensured that everybody was happy with what we were proposing, and has produced a strong and lasting partnership between us and the parish at Orkham Valley. So part of the solution was to remove all the undersized twin culverts and replace them with box culverts so we could improve flood storage and flow capacity. And the downstream channel, for I think it was just under a mile, we had been so neglected it was nearly gone. And the parish didn't know that they were supposed to maintain it. So our highways crews stepped in and restored the channel all the way down to the outfall in a field, and restored it back to good condition. And then I helped them set up a community group, which is still going. I had a phone call from the parish at Orkham today, actually, and they still go out every year as a community, and they clear all the channels all the way down to the outfall as a group, and they do it over a number of weekends. So the total cost of this project was around £19,000. It was just under, sorry, £190,000, including culvert upgrades, highway works, and all the other expenses. So clearing the channels, restoring the road after the floods, which does seem like a lot of money. However, when researching this for the project, the Highways Authority, the Kent Highways, had actually spent over £100,000 every year on flood cleanup on this road, because although it wouldn't flood to the extent of the 2013 flood, it would still flood quite badly and damage the carriageway and require a lot of work to get the carriageway back to a safe standard. So, and then this final slide is just showing the downstream, and this is the channel that Kent Highways dug out and that the parish now continue to maintain. So it's been more than 10 years. The parish still ring me every year to let me know that they've done their ditching works. Our highways team still continue to clear out the sumps and the culvert, although they are under private ownership. So this bit here where the barrier is, what we found is that this culvert was being repeatedly blocked by rubbish getting caught up against it. So highways put in two very deep sumps to catch the rubbish to allow the water to flow on, and every year they come and they clean them out, and the parish maintain the rest of the ditch. So it now costs KCC about £4,500 a year to go and clean a couple of culverts and dig up a couple of sumps. And this road has not flooded since, although other areas, especially Dover, was unfortunately hit very badly earlier in the year. This watercourse held up like a champ, and it's a real good example of how working with local communities and having some community spirit and setting up groups to assist people who may not be able to manage the maintenance all on their own, it can help resolve problems. And then back to you, Louise.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, so this is a similar issue, I suppose, in terms of a lot of impacted residents and being faced with that challenge of trying to actually coordinate it, because each and every one of those properties was a riparian owner. So this is a drainage channel which actually runs along the highway, so it picks up some of the comments that Emma has made around who is ultimately responsible for a ditch that is adjacent to a highway. It was the adjacent landowners. They had responsibility for the whole of the ditch. But in order for the properties which ran alongside the road to access their properties, the ditch had been culverted. Thank you, Emma, just like magic. So the culvert lay within what many people or many of the homeowners believed was sort of a no man's land that was owned by the highway, but ultimately was actually part of their land boundary due to the ad medium film rule. And we had a lot of back and forth with them around this. Essentially, what was happening was we had a 110-metre culvert. It was a continuous culvert with absolutely no chambers within it for maintenance. And some debris had washed down and blocked it. We had root ingress and damage, displaced joints, and over time it just become completely blocked. But the result was that during heavy rainfall and high flows, the ditch would overtop and flood the 11 properties that were there. We were made aware of the issue because Kent Fire and Rescue kept being called out and asked to overpump to reduce the flooding and protect the properties. They contacted us after numerous times of having to attend to say they were having to attend for over 15 hours at a time, which often meant an engine change halfway through and a shift change at exceptional cost. And they've just felt that it wasn't something that they were able to provide for the residents anymore, but also that it wasn't fair just to walk away and abandon them. Obviously, asking 11 properties to all chip into the replacement of a culvert is extremely challenging financially, and also coordinating that with the residents as well. And so as the lead local flood authority, we stepped in to look at how we might be able to help. We certainly did discuss it with our highways colleagues to see if there was something that they could do, but they did fall back on the rule that it belonged to the riparian owners. So we actually used local levy through the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee and Flood Defence Grant in Aid, which is government funding, to carry out the replacement of the culvert for these properties. And as part of it, we installed 3 chambers along the route. So we had much shorter spans of culvert that needed to be maintained by the riparian owners. If one section became blocked, it was easy to drop a pump into the upstream section and over pump to the next chamber to be able to miss the blockage. The blockage could then be cleared at a suitable time when it was safe to do so. So we carried out the project. It was around 120,000 in total to do. We made sure that we maintained access for all of the properties. We made sure that appropriate head walls went in and that it was built and with a sensible sized pipe as well. So it's now if each section is a nice continuous smooth pipe, the connections from the properties go into them properly and are saddled properly, because we also found that there was an awful lot of, I won't say illegal connections, but connections from the properties that had been done very badly, where holes had been smashed into the side of the culvert with a hammer by an over-enthusiastic builder, perhaps. So we made sure that all of the connections were done properly. And as I say, these chambers make sure that residents can inspect the culvert and that they can clear it with rods now. And we've had no flooding in this area since. So simple scheme like that, working in partnership with our colleagues from the Environment Agency and with our highways, I guess, because we had to get a little bit of permission as well to be able to divert, and also by engaging with those residents to try and find a suitable solution, we've managed to address that and better protect those properties. And the maintenance and responsibility was handed back to those riparian owners, and they were more than happy to take that on, knowing that they had a system that was easy to maintain long term, and they could coordinate their efforts together. Thank you.
So that's the end of the presentation. We're on to the questions now. I can't see what's been put in the chat, but we did have some questions that were sent to us prior to the event, and I'm not sure if the people that sent these questions are with us at the moment, or if not, but we thought it would be good just to run through them because they're quite common questions that we get. So very quickly,
Emma, sorry, just
hello?
to interrupt, I've captured the questions that are in the chat, so I'll let you do yours on the screen, and then we can run through those that have been put into the chat. Lovely,
thank you very much. So the first question was, I heard from a local person that the responsibility for the riverbank could fall between 4 different bodies or organisations. Now, as we discussed in just now in the presentation, that is absolutely true. Depending on where you are in the countries, you could pass between different bodies or organisations, or as in Cat's Place, 15 different private landowners. It isn't always just one person responsible for it. So the responsibility would extend to the curtilage of that property. So where your land registry cuts off and says this is the neighbour's land, that's where your responsibility ends for that. So yes, it could fall between 4 different bodies or organisations. I'm not familiar with the area that they're from, so I couldn't comment further on whether that particular location is correct. A second question we had is, if there's fishing rights, do the Angling Association have any responsibility? And I understand this is in relation to dog walkers having a problem with discarded fish hooks in the banks. Fisheries are a function of the Environment Agency, and so for issues like this, we would recommend contacting the fisheries team, because this isn't something that will come under our role as lead local flood authority, or nor does it come under the Land Drainage Act. So that person, I will contact them back and give them information for contacting the fisheries team. I don't know how that's regulated, although it doesn't sound a very nice situation to be in. The third one was, whose responsibility is it to put up warning signs? And if someone drowns, who's liable? So the disclaimer, of course, at first is I'm not a solicitor, and this is touching on some fairly specific legal advice here. So as far as I'm aware, there's no law in England that universally requires signs and lifesavers to be placed by the edge of the water by lead local flood authorities or any other authority that I could see when I looked into this. Responsibility for safety signage and or life-saving equipment tend to be local, case by case, and depend on the ownership and the risk. So again, that depends on the situation, but it's not the responsibility of the LLFA or say an IDB or something to make sure that every watercourse has a sign or a fence or life-saving equipment next to it. Question 4, what can be done to ensure riparian owners fulfil their responsibilities? I'd also like to know the answer to this question, because it's eluded me for the last 10 years. So as I've previously said, is we approach this with working with the landowners. Just like you can't get people to drive their cars nicely, there's no way that we can make everybody do everything they should do and like it. It's very reactive. If there's a problem, we will always try and engage with the landowners and try and see some sort of resolution. The Land Drainage Act is permissive, and it's not very toothy in terms of powers. So, you know, if it's causing an issue to infrastructure or flooding lots of properties, the LLFA is likely to get involved with more formal action. Other than that, it's civil action and, you know, the authority trying to work with the individuals involved. Number 5, why can't the LLFA inspect watercourses to ensure compliance with these responsibilities? So in Kent alone, we've got many thousands of miles of watercourses. Not all of them are mapped. In fact, the majority of them don't show up on Ordnance Survey maps, as they are channels around fields, and they just don't get picked up because they're on private land. LLFA simply don't have the capacity to undertake inspections under a schedule. This would need a team of hundreds of people to to undertake and organise, and it's not practical, nor is it a good use of the public's money. Therefore, we do take the approach of working and educating people as issues arise. And unfortunately, there isn't a one-stop solution. We just have to, try and remember to be kind to each other and work with each other. And even if it may not cause you a problem, and a neighbour says, "Oh, could you dig that bit out?" Maybe that bit of civic mindedness is required with most riparian issues. Number 6, what enforcement powers exist to ensure the riparian owners take responsibility, and how can parish council or flooded residents take action on this? Well, I think the first part has been answered a couple of times, and that is they are permissive powers under the legislation, which the LLFA may choose to or not to take formal enforcement action. The Flood and Water Management Act didn't give any powers to the parish council to act as an enforcement body, neither does the Land Drainage Act. So if further action is wanted in a situation where the lead local flood authority feels that it's not in the public interest to take formal action, we would advise a specialist land drainage solicitor and taking it through the civil courts, because you do have civil rights of enjoyment on your land. It may be a case of they're causing you a nuisance by constantly flooding the bottom of your garden or something. So again, it's one of those issues that is nuanced and depends on the issue and the area. Number 7, can fire and rescue services take a proactive approach in managing flood risk? Well, I think at Cat's Place, that's a good example of where they do that. Certainly in Kent, where they said, hey, we're going out to this location all the time. It's not going to get better. We really need something to happen here. We're being pulled away from, fires or other work that we need to be doing, but they don't have any legal duty to do that. So again, it's more about working with our partners in the county and seeing how we can all help each other, create that dialogue between everybody, and try to work to some resolution to it. Excuse me. Number 8, I'm going to pass this one to Louise, as she's better with the SUDs than I am.
So a SUDS management train depends on natural water courses to carry surface water away from development sites. This person asked, would you agree that national legislation needs updating in relationship to planning, land registry, riparian rights, and the responsibility and use of water courses in relation to SUDS? And also that tertiary technical education for essential building trades and technicians to ensure resilient housing design, ongoing monitoring and maintenance of common areas and SUDS has received little attention. I would say that I think since the new National Planning Policy Framework and the updated technical standards have been brought in, we have seen an improvement in this. Obviously, it's still being implemented. So actually, the benefits that we hope to see from it haven't quite got there yet, but we are moving in the right direction, I would suggest. So there's now, under the national standards, sort of as you say, a train for how discharge should be achieved. So ultimately, these are prioritised, and with the final option, if no other option can be achieved through sustainable drainage or discharge to ground, would be the connection into a surface network. So I think it has been recognised nationally that we need to do more. Development needs to work harder to manage surface water, and that can be achieved through sustainable drainage. So as these things are implemented and as the statutory consultees we get that opportunity to comment, I hope to see significant improvement. It is always difficult. We have to work with development, and as a statutory consultee, obviously we can't enforce these things. Our comments go back to the local planning authority, and they ultimately make the decision. We do add conditions that we expect to see delivered, and then we discharge these to help manage sustainable drainage and generally drainage across development. The connection into watercourses from a development is a challenging one. We don't actually have the power to stop it. We only consent the actual connection into that watercourse. But our colleagues in our planning team do talk to Emma about whether she thinks it's appropriate that the flow of water entering that channel is done at a sensible rate. And we also try and consider what the downstream risk may be to a local community, ensuring that we see no additional flow within that channel from the development, in the hope that we can help to manage it. But as I said, and I think Emma has spoken about during the presentation, our powers are limited, and we have to work within the confines of what we've been given. And I think we do our best to work with our partners and the developments to ensure that that is done. I think there's that question was quite detailed, and we're happy to sort of provide a written formal, or not a formal, a written response to the person with maybe a bit more detail, or perhaps have a conversation with them outside of this, because I do appreciate it was quite a detailed question. I appreciate it was in relation, I think, to Devon, and so they're welcome to either speak to us or perhaps even engage with their lead local flood authority in Devon to discuss that in more detail, and hopefully that team down there will be able to give them a little bit more insight. I think that was all of the written questions we had received. There were some questions in the chat. I've made a note of these, and I'm happy to run through them. So within the presentation, there was a picture of two men clearing a trash screen with no PPE, and someone rightly pointed out that they were wearing no PPE. I would say it was a stock photo, but I think it highlights the importance of actually maintaining and clearing things like trash screens in good weather, and not when it's flooding and when it's dangerous to do so. So I think, we would always recommend maintaining your structures, ensuring they're clear. If you know that bad weather is coming, make sure that you've cleared them when the flow is low, and ideally in good weather when it's safe to do so. And obviously ensure you are wearing the appropriate PPE when you do. With regards to who would take enforcement for the build of SUDs in development, and who's responsible for that. So as a statutory consultee, we would often put conditions onto our response and onto that planning permission, and we would expect to see as-built drawings provided by the developer sent to us before we would discharge those conditions. So we have a role to play in making sure that they've been built appropriately, but we do not, as Emma has said, we don't actually have the resource to be able to go out and check everything. It does fall back to our LPA colleagues as well to carry out enforcement should we highlight that we don't think things have been built to the plan or as the condition stated. So there are some checks and balances for it. It's perhaps not as good as it could be. There was a question around the Environment Agency and it being classed as a main river, but the Environment Agency still stating that riparian ownership had responsibility. I'm afraid that still does stand, even if it is designated as main river and it falls under the Environment Agency as the authority. Authority body like ourselves, riparian ownership still applies, so you would either own to the centre line or the whole of the river, and I think if there's work to do and the Environment Agency have to carry out that work, there may be a charge associated with it. I would hope that they would speak to you as the riparian owner in advance of carrying out that work, rather than simply just slapping a charge on you. But I'm not entirely sure where that person was located or what their relationship is with the Environment Agency. But I would suggest trying to develop a relationship going forward to open up that dialogue. There was a question around Schedule 3, which was brought in as item 1 on the PIT review. Your guess is as good as mine as to when that will be implemented. It has been kicked down the road for a significant amount of time. We were under the impression from DEFRA that consultation was due in spring of this year. I guess it's a DEFRA spring, which is a very, very long time, and rolls right through to winter. Unfortunately, we don't know. We would be quite keen to see Schedule 3 implemented. It certainly would allow us to have a bit more control over the long-term maintenance of sustainable drainage, where we know that it could offer some benefit to the local community in terms of flood risk. But as it stands, no one is any the wiser on Schedule 3, unfortunately. So we continue to wait to see what the government will do with it. And it may again change with the local government reorganisation and devolution, which is being brought through. Someone had raised a question about a watercourse within common land. I would suggest that all common land is owned normally by somebody, whether that's the local council, or privately owned, or the National Trust, and therefore riparian responsibility would lie with the landowner or between two landowners. It's often worth checking land registry for items like for common land to see who is the responsible person or the owner for that. So it would normally, I think, fall back to sort of local authorities, parish councils, town councils and the like, but it may be in private ownership or with a charity or a trust. We have common land within Tunbridge Wells, which is owned by a charitable trust called the Conservators, who manage it and ultimately take responsibility.
I have come across one, Louise, just to pop in, that was owned by multiple people by a group. So some common land is owned by groups, so you may have 6 people listed as riparian owners.
Just to add some complication to it.
Yeah, some fun.
I think there was a question around devolution and if the county is currently responsible and then it was passed to a district or a new unitary authority. At the moment, through local government reorganisation and devolution, we don't really know what's going to happen with the current lead local flood authority roles. They will be passed over to somebody, but I think it's still being worked through who ultimately they will sit with. But the role won't disappear. It will simply be transitioned from county councils down to the unitaries, or in some instances it may sit with the strategic authority. But yes, it's all a little bit of an unknown at the moment. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, you're very welcome to email us after this and sort of ask again, just to clarify things. There was a question around do the highways authorities ever own the culverts? Again, it leads back to the ad medium film rule, and Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, unless the culvert is at a right angle to the road and it crosses it, in which case it may fall under the responsibility of the highway. Is that correct? Or not always?
Not always,
Not
but
always.
in general, as always, there's never one clear rule. So generally, any watercourse running via a culvert under a highway, certainly in Kent, will be cleared by the highways team, simply to protect road users from poor workmanship or overzealous clearing, which may damage the carriageway. So the highways don't own the culvert, they don't claim responsibility for it, but they will clear them in order to preserve the carriageway and public safety. But only where it's laterally across, not where it runs down the side of the carriageway, I should clarify.
Thanks, Emma. There was a question about the fact that it may be worth challenging riparian ownership of a culvert because someone had managed to get Thames Water to take responsibility for it. Yes, it is often worth challenging. I think where ordinary watercourses are part of the surface water sewer network, we're seeing that these are often being demained, and so the responsibility does fall back to the landowner. But it is often worth challenging your ownership if it's a culvert and you think that others are using it for their own purposes. So it is a very new, as Emma has alluded to, it is a very nuanced area, and it's often worth a little bit more exploration and discussion with other authorities or partners. Someone had raised a question about historic weirs being recently repaired and the riverbed between the weirs has risen due to the deposits of silt. Is the problem solely the responsibility of the riparian owner, even though they've not caused the changes? The person that's, I don't know who had carried out the project. It's possible it does fall back to the riparian owner. I would suggest that if the work has been carried out by another body, for example, the Environment Agency, that actually that is part of the project that should probably have been managed as part of the project. And it may be worth actually going back to the people that did the project to have that discussion and talk about the implications that it's caused. I would suggest that this sounds like the repair of the weirs has been done separately to the riparian owner, and therefore I would say they probably got just cause to go back and ask for some bed regrading to be carried out. But I think it's one of those situations where, as Emma has said, good communication and some collaboration may be needed to resolve that issue. I don't think it's clear cut in terms of who would be responsible, unless Emma, you've got a different thought.
No, I would say exactly the same.
Very difficult one. Yeah. Case study 2. So Cat's Place, why didn't we daylight it? A very good question. We looked at multiple options for this, and we had to in order to secure the funding. Daylighting it was one of the options. We would have quite liked to have daylighted it and put in clear span culverts like we had or crossings as we had done with Orcombe. Unfortunately, space was against us. That verge was absolutely chocker full of utilities, and we had very, very limited space, so we had to follow the existing line of the old culvert and squeeze a new one back in to the same size. So sometimes just life is against you, and you have to work with the space that you've got, and unfortunately on that we couldn't do an improvement or a betterment in the terms of the scheme. We had to just do a like for like swap. I suppose the betterment was achieved by putting in the chambers, but it was tight, is all I'm going to say. And we had a telegraph pole with a power line on it as well. So it was a very difficult project to deliver and caused a few headaches. But yeah, there is always betterment that can be achieved, and we would look to do that where we can. And I'm just going to go to Hilary Scott, who's had her hand up very patiently for a very long time while we've run through all of those questions. Oh, sorry, Hilary, we can't hear you. I don't know, I can't hear.
No, I can't hear either.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I don't know if you want to type your question into the chat and I'll try and pick it up there. Under the Water Act, a riparian is required to maintain a flood defence. Local authority, oh, so Emma, I don't know if you want to jump in here. I'll read the question. Under the Water Act, a riparian owner is required to maintain a flood defence. If the riparian owner is a local authority, what enforcement action could be taken to ensure that they maintain their flood defence? Does it require action from residents against the local authority?
This is an interesting one because in Kent, we don't own any channels, neither do we own any structures, or we don't adopt them either. So in the Environment Agency, they have what's known as T98 inspectors, which are structural inspectors. I've done this course, it's quite interesting. So I think in that case, I would direct the person to the Environment Agency and ask them to carry out a formal inspection of the structure before you think about the legal action role, because it may look like it's not functioning, but structurally it may be okay. So I would get third-party verification that the structure is no longer fit for purpose. And then I guess, yes, either the Environment Agency or civilly you could take action against the County Council or the LLFA or the Unitary Authority, whoever is undertaking that role. But I would hope that would never be an actual issue anywhere, because these structures are fairly important. So if that is an actual issue somewhere, do feel free to email me and I'll look into it and see if I can point you in the right direction.
And likewise, I think, as we have said, try and open up that dialogue with the local authority where you can. You can use obviously your elected members or your MP to try and open up that route of dialogue and have that conversation if you've got concerns. I would hope that they're friendly. I think we certainly are, and we're always open and willing to having that conversation with residents and communities. So I would hope other councils across the country likewise. But yeah, I think before taking legal action, which is expensive for both sides, it's worth trying to have a conversation about what the concerns may be.
Hillary's typed in now. I've just seen it because she's been so patient.
There's one more question just before that, which is there any way we can get developers to right-size their SUDs for a new housing development? Many choose the cheapest SUDs rather than a suitable one. So this should go through planning, and we would certainly request flood risk assessment for that, and to check that the SUDs is appropriate. We do quite detailed assessments of the calculations that have been used to assess the SUDs, and within our team we will certainly kick back anything that we think is undersized or not suitable. I can't speak for other planning departments or statutory consultees in terms of Lead Local Flood Authority, but we are quite strict in Kent, and we always make sure that they are a suitable size or bigger, unless there is a really well, no, I'm going to say I don't think there is an unless. The team are quite tough. So if you're developing in Kent, you will come up against us if we think you are undersized. Again, I would suggest having a conversation with your Lead Local Flood Authority team if you think that developers aren't achieving what they could be, and see how that can be addressed. And Hilary, your question, is the default designation where no ownership assigned for a sump by the land registry, riparian owners? KCC and Highways have both said our local sump isn't their responsibility except for drains in and out of it.
Do you want me to?
I do, Emma. Sorry.
So this one, Hilary, might be worth a discussion tomorrow about. Actually, I'll pick that up. Maybe you can email me your contact details. So I'm assuming that in this instance, the land is unregistered, and so there's no way of knowing who it owns to. The legal presumption is it's the neighbouring landowner's responsibility. And so if I'm assuming there's a road nearby, because you've said you've included highways. So assuming that the highway is also unregistered, ad medium film comes into play. Adjacent landowners, it's their land to the centre line of the road, and it is their responsibility. Now, these are really difficult to enforce where there's no legal landowner, because we have to prove they own the land, and we can't because it's unregistered. So these ones are big problems, and please contact me and I will help you look at this one. I think
we'll have a look into
discussion will be better. Sorry for the really super brief.
And I think finally, Stephen.
Even.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
We had issues, we still do have issues with wild swimming in Somerset and Dorset, and we checked on the signage, etc. And apparently, the Magna Carta is still a legal document, although most of the laws have been updated over the years. But the right to swim, bathe, and to wash your clothes in a watercourse next to a highway, be that a footpath, a bridleway, or a road, is a legal right of any man or woman in England. And that is still the case. So you don't have to if you put a sign up, you're acknowledging a risk, in which case you've got to insure. But the legal right, and we had to check this through the lawyers, is still a right, as long as there's a right of access. You can't walk across someone's field and go swimming, but if there's a footpath or a bridleway or a highway next to the watercourse, it's all yours.
We look forward to seeing a lot of people bathing in the ditches of Kent. Hopefully not.
Those heavy metals taste so good.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That was very informative. We weren't aware of that, but it's always good to know.
I have actually come across that before, Louise.
Okay.
And quite often, where we have residents with larger channels and people come in and wade into them, we advise they slacken the banks so you can crawl out easily, and they don't put signs up for that very reason, that you're inviting a legal challenge if someone gets drunk and falls in. So yeah, I have actually come across that before. It's an interesting one.
Very good to know. Thank you. I think that's everything from us, Jean.
Yeah, I think that was excellent. Thank you so much, Louise and Emma. Really appreciate that. We are still recording, and that will be available to anybody who wants it, and for those who couldn't attend. I think you're happy to share the slides. So if anybody wants those, drop me an email and I'll make sure you get those. And also, any questions, if Emma and Louise are happy to follow up on any questions, then please do drop them over to me and we'll make sure that they get passed on. But other than that, if we're happy to wrap up there, that was excellent. Thank you so much for your time. So much information and so much to take on board. I'm going to spend some more time tomorrow watching it all again. So, and thank you everybody for attending. Hope you found it worthwhile. So, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for coming.
Good evening,
Cheerio.
Just trying to stop the recording.